All right. So, hi, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this series of sessions with me and my team from 366 it's on the guided course towards Microsoft certification. The certification that we are currently targeting among ourselves in the team, and we are going to share our experiences of how we are going through the preparations and some tips and tricks from us our side. And that certification would be AZ-204, which is Developing Solutions for Microsoft Azure. So it's a 12 module course that is available on Microsoft Learn, and this basically prepares you towards your certification as a Azure Developer Associate. So what we are trying to do over here is that we will be taking a sort of experience sharing sessions among the team for the next 12 weeks. And these 12 weeks, we will take one module every week and we'll be doing these sessions and we'll be taking you through how that particular module contents are to be basically deciphered or decoded directly in a hands-on mode. So what I have felt in my experiences while doing my certifications is that there is a lot of content that is available online for all the courses that are available on Microsoft. But as a developer, I sometimes feel that the documentation that is available may or may not help me while I'm doing those activities directly on portal.azure or as a developer. When I try to do those things, I somehow get stuck in some of the activities, and it quite helps me when I see someone doing that practically, and there's a hands-on feel to that, and that basically is a lot helpful than reading through a lot of literature. So our idea of these sessions that we are trying to do from here on is that we want to give you a hands-on experience as to how those modules can be deciphered or basically can be carried on by you. Uh, in this, what I would majorly focus is on the actual practical side of it. So after a few of the slides on the basic introduction and stuff, I'll just move directly towards portal.azure and we will just go through each of the sub modules and try to basically focus on how everything has to be done. So without taking any further time, I'll just like to introduce you to my team who is also going to help me with the sessions that are coming forward in the subsequent weeks. I have Ritvik, who is a developer with us, who will be helping me with these sessions as well. And I have also got Rishabh, who is also a developer in our team and is also going to be taking up a few sessions for you. I myself am Abhijeet Das Gupta. I am a technology solutions architect in 365, and I look after and have been working as a Azure developer for quite some time. And I'm a Microsoft certified developer on 365 as well. So we would like to take this opportunity to welcome and thank you all for joining this session. And these sessions are currently online, live online, and these will be also available on our YouTube channel, which is SkyPiCast, and we will be uploading these sessions directly onto that channel as well. So let's move forward. So this is a quick introduction about myself, which I mentioned. Myself, Abhijeet Das Gupta, Product and Technology Solutions Architect at 365 Technologies. If you would like to uh, connect with me, this is my flow card, which is the QR code is available over here. You can just scan it and have my coordinates if you would like to touch base upon with me. And feel free to give me a shout out anytime you want to have anytime you want to connect with me or share your experiences or have any queries. So let's just jump into a sort of a session overview as to what we are trying to achieve or what we are going to go through in this session. Uh, so first of all, I would like to just give you a brief introduction about what AZ-204 is and how does it help any developer, or why should anyone do the AZ-204 certification? So if I say that, so you could be a Azure developer you could be a existing Azure developer who is already developing on Azure, C Sharp, Microsoft Stack, or you are someone who is planning on migrating to Azure Cloud. You might be on working on some other cloud platforms like Google or AWS, and you would like to uh, take your competencies further towards Microsoft Azure. This is a course or this is certification that would help you immensely in that. AZ-204 is something which would make you proficient not only in Azure SDKs, different data storage options, different data connections, APIs, apps, authentications, authorizations, computes, container deployments. These all are something which any uh, app developer requires during his day-to-day life. And Azure, this certification basically gives you that hands-on experience on how Azure as a cloud platform works in this particular vertical. And it will take you through a journey wherein you will see how we can very easily deploy app services, where we can have our app services connected with different sort of authentication mechanisms, how we can scale or auto scale our applications to basically manage the ever-changing demands of the application in terms of the traffic and the volume of users that we have. Uh, Different sets of implementations like the CI/CD pipelines, how they are implemented. We would also see how we can basically manage different slots like staging, development, production, how they can easily be managed, and basically they are pretty much managed in the portal of Azure. So a person who is trying to get into Azure, who is a developer who wants to migrate or move into the Azure Microsoft domain and wants to explore this, this certificate is for them. For people who are already into the Microsoft Azure space, this certification also helps them to basically any certification, even though you might be someone who has an expertise on these fields, but trust me that when you do take these exams and you do take these courses and certifications, it helps you immensely, even if you think that you know a lot about this particular platform. What I have understood from my experience is that when you do these certifications, you also know a lot of minute details which usually are not something which we consider in our day-to-day development. And this basically expands your horizon a lot about the platform, about the services, about the features that are available. Because in our day-to-day development, trust me, we hardly use about 20 to 30% of the features that are available. And when we architect our solutions, when we work on the solution approaches, it is always the limited amount of information and about the features and functionalities that we know and have been using. We only confine our solutions around those. But once you take these exams and courses, you know that what are the possibilities that are available. And that makes you a better developer in terms of how you deliver your turnaround times, your performance of the application, everything gets immensely impacted. So saying that, this is something that we are going to see in different modules that we are going to undertake in this. So that is something which I wanted to just answer, because I have received a lot of questions as to why we should do this Azure AZ-204 as a certification. So that is something that I just wanted to clarify on that. So this session that we are currently going to undertake, this session would be on the first of the 12 sub-modules that is part of this AZ-204. And the first module that we are currently targeting for this session today is the Create Azure App Service Web Apps. So this Create Azure App Service Web Apps is something which also has a few sub topics which we are going to cover today in a hands-on manner. And in this screen, what I would also like to just give you a brief overview about is the plan of the different sessions. So there are about 12 sessions that we are going to take, and these are the sessions that you can expect every week from our team. So without further ado, let's start with our module for the today, which is creating Azure App Service Web Apps. So what is the objective of this particular module. So this module would basically allow you to learn how Azure App Service functions, how to create, update, deploy, manage your apps that you deploy. So everything related to an app service or an app service in Azure, that is something which will be covered today. One of the important questions in this particular juncture is that what is an Azure App Service? So an Azure App Service is basically an HTTP-based service for hosting web applications. In this app service, you're also able to deploy REST APIs. You can deploy mobile backends. You can deploy scheduled tasks, which are known as web jobs, wherein you can just set up the crons and you can just schedule some activities which you want to run on a schedule. Those everything can be made possible using an Azure App Service. So that is a very flexible and a very versatile sort of a service that Azure has in terms of application deployment. Uh, I would say that there are a few prerequisites, although I don't consider these as prerequisites, but everyone who has a sort of a passion to work on this can absolutely take this particular certification directly. But if you would like to understand more about what Microsoft Azure Cloud Services are about and then take on this, you can also go with a fundamental course which Microsoft Azure has to offer, which is called AZ-900 Azure Fundamentals courses, which basically tells you about the Azure ecosystem as a whole and gives you some fundamental information about what Azure is capable of. But if you're someone who wants to take a deep dive into how things are done, then this is the course in terms of the Azure App Services which you would like to take up. So going through with the next set of activities, let's just go with the first. Let's just go with the structure of this particular module, which is the App Services module. So this particular module has been further subdivided into four categories or four subsections, so to say. The first one that we would be undertaking would be the exploring the Azure App Service, what the Azure App Service is, how we can deploy our applications, how an app service can be created. Those sort of things would be taken up in this section. The second section, we would see different web app settings that we can do in Azure App Service. The third part would be dealing with scaling the apps, whether it can be done manually or we can schedule auto scale functions which automatically scale your application up or down based on the load of the application. And the third or the fourth subsection that would be taken about would be the deployment slots. So deployment slots are also a very interesting and important part of any sort of web app deployment, wherein you need to manage different deployments like the development, staging, production, those sort of things have to be managed. This helps you immensely in that as well. So saying that, without any further delay, I'll just jump in straight to the portal.azure.com portal, which is your sort of your central location from where everything and around Azure actually has to be done. So before that, I just had this tab opened, which I would just like to dwell for just a few minutes. This is the actual certification, which is Microsoft Certified Azure Developer Associate, which we are targeting right now. And if you come to this URL under docs.microsoft.com and go to certifications and browse for the certification called AZ-204, you would find this page. And this has all the basically the entire sort of path in for this particular certification. So feel free to come in here, create your own Microsoft Learn account, and start your journey. And we are here to help you in that journey with yourself. For this, one of the important prerequisites that we have for any sort of Azure learning would be an Azure instance. So for Microsoft Azure, the best thing about Microsoft Azure is that even if you are not part of an organization who uses Azure or you do not have an existing Azure instance, you are always allowed to create a free account from Azure. And this Azure free account can be created by anyone. And this allows you about $200 worth of free credits for the first month. And that $200 is a huge amount in a cloud platform, and you can do anything with that $200 for the first month. After the first month, you still get about uh, some popular services which Microsoft has listed, which do change from time to time for the next 12 months. And 40 plus services are always free on Azure. So even if you or your organization is currently not on Azure Cloud, you can always create your own free account on Azure, and you can just start with your Azure journey. Saying that, I'll just go to this tab, which is basically the Microsoft Azure's central dashboard. So this is basically your portal wherein you perform all your Azure related activities. So this Azure site, to come to this site, you just need to visit this URL, which is called portal.azure.com. You log in with your credentials that you have. And once you come here, you have to take a subscription from Azure. The way to take a subscription is if you are signing up for a free account, you automatically are given a free trial subscription, which you can see is assigned to me as well. So I am currently using the free trial subscription of Microsoft Azure only. And once you come to this, you will see that subscription in that subscription section of this. So as soon as you see that you have an active subscription on Microsoft Azure portal, you are good to go. If you do not have a Azure subscription, which you can see on this portal, the way to add a subscription would be to click on this add link over here. And as soon as we click on this, you are presented with an array of different subscription offers that your account has. So you can pretty much choose whichever you want, and you can just start with that. The process is pretty straightforward. You just need to put in your details, your name, your contact details from where the authentications are done, and then you need to verify your account using either a debit card or a credit card, which is credited with a very small amount of 1 or 2 INR, and that gets reverted back as well. And that is just for validation, verification of your identity. But even if you are on a free trial subscription, it is not that after the free trial has expired, your services would automatically be upgraded to a paid service, and you would be be started to be billed for that. It's not the case. The way Microsoft Azure subscription works in the free trial is that once your free trial expires, it has to be manually upgraded by you, which you can see on my screen over here on the top left. Until and unless you manually upgrade your subscription doesn't automatically move on to a paid subscription. So you don't have to worry about any sort of unexpected bills or something coming your way. If you want to upgrade, you're always free to do so. But if not, you can just use the free services as is. So saying that, let's just start with the Azure App Services, the first section, examining the app services. So to do that, the first thing that we need to do is we need to deploy an app service. How do we deploy an app service? There are multiple ways through which you can initiate the process. The first way is if you can see the app services icon on the home page. This is where you can just click or just click on this create shortcut, or you can move from here. The other way is searching for the app services. You can click on the top search bar, type on app services, and you can get the app services from here. The third option would be clicking on these three bars over on the left, and in here also you should see the app services on as your favorites. So whichever way you prefer, you just have to click on the app services and you come over here. I don't have a current app service created right now, and which we will be creating right now. So we will click on the create app service, and then you have a wizard which comes up with different sets of details that you need to fill in, and then you basically have to create the app service. So the first thing that we have to select is a subscription. So your organization might have different subscriptions that are currently active, and as a user, you might be responsible for multiple subscriptions as well. So if you are someone who has multiple subscriptions in their account, you have to basically choose which subscription you want to add this particular service on. So currently, since I only have one subscription, it comes up in my drop down. Next, I have to either select or create a new resource group. Now, resource group is a very interesting feature in Microsoft Azure. So resource group in itself is a sort of what you can say is it's sort of a way of organizing resources under an entity or a container or a name. So resource group basically is nothing, but it is a way of uh, organizing different resources that you create on Azure. How does it help? When you have a Microsoft Azure instance where you manage a lot of resources, and those resources could be for different projects, those could be for different customers, clients. Uh, this can actually help you a lot. You can create different resource group for different projects or different customers and manage your resources inside of that. How does it help? You can basically manage a particular project or a client's resources directly from a resource group, and you do not have to find or manage each and every resource in a separate way. You all have all the resources for a particular project or client in one place, and that helps a lot in managing those resources. So we just have to create a new resource right now. I'll just create my resource group and call it as SkyPiCast session 1 and click on OK. And after that, this is the instance name that I need to put in. I have to put in a web app name, which will be the URL for accessing our web app service. So I will just call it as SkyPiCast1, and it automatically checks whether the domain is available or not. It is automatically assigned a domain which is on Azure Websites.net subdomain, and this is something that gets created. Now, the third option is how do you want to deploy your code? Whether it is something which you are going to manually deploy, whether it is a Docker container or is it a static web app. For us, we are going to use a code option because we are going to deploy a small HTML-based web app, which we are going to demonstrate in this. Then you have to choose a runtime stack. So Microsoft Azure gives you a huge array of platforms that you can work with, and this actually allows you to deploy any sort of application that you can create. It doesn't necessarily have to be a Microsoft tech stack only. So it allows you .NET frameworks, it allows you Java, Node, PHP, Python, Ruby, and you can pretty much deploy any sort of applications into these. So right now I can choose anything because the one that I am going to deploy is just a plain HTML text, HTML web app, which I'm going to deploy. So I'm just going to use an ASP.NET 4.8. And depending upon what runtime stack you're using, you do have options of the operating system where this particular app service would be deployed. So ASP.NET, as you all know, is something which only runs on Windows, and that's why you only have an option of Windows. But if you go and select maybe Java, you will see that you have option of Linux as well as Windows. So that means that a server stack which can be deployed on Linux or Windows, you have an option to use any of those. And if something which is only available on Windows, you can just choose, you just have an option of Windows. So the operating system is something which is driven by the platform or the runtime stack that you're using. So I've just used ASP.NET 4.8, which can be deployed on a Windows operating system. And now the next thing that I need to choose is the region. So in a cloud infrastructure, regions are very important. So how cloud ecosystem works is that Microsoft Azure has its data centers spread across the world, across different areas and different countries and continents. So the resource that you are trying to deploy, uh, the place or the region, the data center where you want to deploy, you pretty much have the flexibility to choose where you want to deploy your resources. That is absolutely possible while deploying these cloud resources. So right now I'm based out of India, and so I'll just choose one of the places which is nearest to me. So I'll just choose a Central India region because choosing a region is also very important when you are deploying a cloud infrastructure. Why is it important? Is because of the proximity of the data center to the customers who is going to access it. So let's say that you have your customer base in India, but you are deploying your app services and your infrastructure somewhere in Europe. Compare that with a server that is deployed in India to a server that is deployed in Europe. With the speed of internet that we currently have today, it doesn't matter much, but it's still, when you take it in context of the amount of volume of data that is transacted on your application and the number of people that are coming, the traffic, it might be worthwhile to deploy your resources into a region which is nearer to the customer base that you are going to serve. So right now, since I'm in India right now, I would be choosing the Central India region. Then the next most important part that needs to be chosen is the app service plan. So what are app service plans? So app service plans basically determine where your resources are going to be deployed, what would be the cost, what would be the compute, the memory, the CPU, how much amount of resources you're going to put into that particular service. So these are all something which are part of the app service plan. One of the things that you might notice is that when I try to create this app service plan, the SKU and the size that I can see is only free F1. So the only app service plan that I can see right now on the screen is the free one, and I do not have an option to change it. But don't worry, we will be able to change it after we make the create the resource. So this is something which you may say as a limitation of the free trial subscription that we currently have. If you are on a paid subscription, you would automatically have an option to choose the tier and the plan that you want. So that is something that you can do over here. But right now, we're just going to choose the free F1 and go to review and create. But you can directly click on review and create, and the app would start deploying. But I would just like to go through the next steps as well, which are optional, but which you can just go through and have a look as well. So I'm just going to click on next, which would take you to this screen on deployment. So this is one of the options which has been recently introduced in Azure, and it is implementation of GitHub Actions, which is a CI/CD pipeline process from GitHub. And if you have that in your organization, and if you have your GitHub repositories and your CI/CD pipelines created, you pretty much can enable this, authorize your GitHub account, select your organization, repository, branches, and pretty much set up the CI/CD pipeline uh, and your GitHub repository wherever you are keeping your applications. As soon as the code merges are done and you put them into the production, they automatically are deployed in the Azure side of it, and you do not have to manually do that. But that is something which you have to basically set up on your GitHub side as well as an organization level as well. So next, I will just go to the networking. This is also a new feature that Microsoft has introduced, that whether you want to enable network injection or not. One of the things that you can see is that I do not have an option to enable or disable this. That is because the app service plan that was default selected was free, and it is only available on basic, standard, and premium and upwards plans. So this can be enabled if those plans have been selected during the app creation. So we will have a look at these options later on from the settings side of it. Right now, we're just trying to deploy this service. Next, we have the monitoring, which would ask you whether you want to deploy application insights or not for your application. So application insights is a sort of a insightful dashboard that you have for your app service, which tells you how many errors you had, what was the traffic, where was the traffic coming from, what is the performance of the application in terms of security, in terms of accessibility, if there are any errors or recurrent errors that are coming up. So a total health dashboard of your application can be seen on application insights. So if you're creating a web app service, an enterprise web app service, or a customer facing web app service, which is a production, and it is recommended that you have this application insights enabled. But if it is something which you're just using as a development purpose, or the application that you are trying to deploy is just for your learning, it may or may not help you, because this just won't serve the purpose, because it requires data to provide you those insights. So, but just to go through this demo, I'll just enable this insights. For this, we have to just give a name and a region and click on next. Then this is an interesting tab that we have for almost all resources that are deployed on Microsoft Azure. And this is called tags. It's an absolutely optional input that you want that you can use. But this helps in managing your resources in terms of tagging the resources. Like you have different cost centers, if you have different project owners, you can basically tag them and basically choose which you want. Like if you want to, let's say that you want to put this into a project, and the value would be SkyPiCast session 1 or something. Uh, I can just put this, and this just gets this tag just gets created, and this just helps the administrators of the portal to basically identify and manage the resources. The last tab is a review and create. It just gives you a review of all the options that you've selected in the previous steps and just lets you create the deployment. As soon as you click the create button, you will see that on the top right corner in the notifications, you will see that it says deployment in progress, and you will see the screen as well. It might take a few minutes depending on what resources you are deploying. It will take a few minutes of your time, and it will just show you the progress of the deployment process. So right now we are just going to wait for this to get deployed, and we will then go to the resource. But when you are doing this for your production purposes and you have multiple deployments to do, you have a SQL database that you want to deploy, you want an app service to deploy, you have multiple resources that you want to deploy. So what you can just do is just start the deployment process and then move away from the screen. And you can just keep on deploying other resources, and Azure will just tell you on the notifications if the resource were deployed successfully or not, and you can just go to the resources. So it doesn't mean that while the deployment is happening, you have to stay on the screen. That is absolutely not necessary. So while we were talking, our deployment has got completed, and we'll just click on this button called Go to Resource, and we will just move on to our resource. And you can just see that this is the overview panel, which says the resource group that we created, the status, the sent subscription that we are running this on, the URL for our website. If we just click on this, it will show us a default page that is for every Microsoft Azure Web App Service. It just gets deployed with this particular default page. And you see this app service plan, which is currently being shown as F1 free. So I told you that while deploying, since I was using a free trial account, I was not allowed to choose any other app service plan. So, but I do have an option to change it later, which I'm going to do this because a lot of the features that we are going to discuss later on, they would require a higher plan for us to explore those. So I'm just going to do that first. So what I'm going to do is you have two options. Either you can just click on this app service plan and go to the URL or open the page for the app service plan, or you also have an option wherein in the left panel, if you just scroll down a bit, you will see an option called Scale Up App Service Plan. You can just click on this and it will open up the same window as well. In this, you can see all the different app service plans that are part of Microsoft Azure. And in this, it has been segregated across three different categories. One is a dev or test, meaning applications which you deploy for your development and testing purposes. They can be deployed on these app service plans. So you can just see what the resources are basically provided in those and what is the cost implication for those. So like the one that we currently are using is a free one, but it just gives us 1 GB of memory and 60 minutes per day of compute, which is absolutely not feasible for or is not basically it's not something which you can deploy a production application. The other ones that we see is this D1, which is a shared infrastructure, 1 GB memory, 250 minutes, and it is a minute per day compute as well. So these are all test or dev related instances that you can deploy. If you want to go on a production instance, you have to see this production tab and you have all these options, which obviously are higher priced, but they give you a higher amount of resources as well to cater to the demands of your application. And then you have the isolated ones where the application absolutely can be deployed and on a different sort of infrastructure, which is absolutely isolated and it is sort of your own virtual space which you get. But those are something which are rarely used and are used only on very large scale applications. For most applications, about 70-80% of the applications that we have, the production ones are absolutely sufficient. So for this demo, what we are going to do is we are going to choose the S1, which gives us a total of 100 total ACUs, which are Azure Compute Units, 1.7 GB of memory, and it would cost about 5,785 INR on an estimated basis per month. So to just scale up your applications is absolutely easy. Whenever you are saying that there is a lag or there is some sort of resource constrictions that you are seeing on your app service, you can just come over to this place and you can choose uh, whichever app service plan or scale that you want. You can just choose and click on apply, and it's as easy as that. As soon as you click on that, it just goes through an updation process, and your resources for the entire app service just gets upgraded. So as soon as this comes up, if I go to go back to my app service by clicking on the back button, you will see that the app service plan would have now gotten upgraded, and I can pretty much uh, see the new features and the resources over there. So I just go to the overview screen, and as soon as I open the overview screen, after a few seconds, you see the resource plan updated over here on the right side. Or you can just click on the scale up button as well. Yeah, you can see it over here that it has now got to S11, which is the tier that I just upgraded myself to. All right. So what we are now going to see is once we have created this app service and we see that the basic default application that Microsoft Azure deploys for you is available, how do we deploy our application that we have created? So there are several ways you can do that. So the ways to do that would be the first, you can just come to on the left panel, you just come to this deployment center. Once you come to this deployment center, you will see these three tabs: the settings, the logs, and the FTPS credentials. The settings option basically allows you to set up your CI/CD pipeline, wherein you have an option to select the source or the CI/CD source, or you can also do a manual push as well. The CI/CD pipelines that are currently supported in Azure are GitHub, Bitbucket, any local Git that you might be maintaining yourself, or you can also use Azure repos from the Azure DevOps. So these are the four pipelines that can be used to integrate with Azure Web App Services. And once the pipelines are set up, your CI/CD is completed, and automatically, as soon as the new code changes are pushed to the main branch, they are automatically pushed over here as well. If you want to do a manual push or a manual deployment, there are three options, which is an external Git. If there is a public or a private repo on github.com which you want to use as a deployment source, you can do that. If you can have a source of your web app on a OneDrive or a Dropbox as well, and it can pick up information or code directly from those sources as well and deploy them. But these options are pretty much when you want to do your uh, deployments from any sort of repositories or something. But what if you want to deploy something which is directly on your machine, you have developed it yourself, and you just want to push it and upload it? So for that, you have this option called FTPS Credentials. If you go over here, you have the FTPS endpoint, you have the username, and you have the password. And you basically need only three options from this to basically set up your FTP client. So you can use any FTP client, like I use FileZilla, and in there you just have to put this as a URL, the username, and the password, and automatically your FTP connection is established, and you are connected with the FTP portal for this particular app service, and you can manually deploy your applications from there on. Uh, the third option that I also sometimes use for deploying my applications directly through this portal is something which I find very convenient to use, is this part, which is the advanced tools. So this advanced tools is something which opens up a console, which Microsoft calls as Kudu console. And this Kudu console basically allows you to manage your app service from the backend. It allows you to see and uh, basically manage the processes that are running. If you want a certain process to be killed, or if you want to see which process is running, you can do that using the Process Explorer part of it. You can just come in here and see what processes are currently running. If you want to uh, maybe kill something, if there is a process that is running and you want to just kill it, you can do that. You can see the different properties. You can start profiling the processes. You can do all those things. The other important part, or the other important feature of this, is this debug console. So this debug console has two varieties. One is a command prompt and one is a PowerShell. You can choose either one of those, and it basically opens up the file system or a file explorer on the top and a console on the bottom part of the screen. And this screen can also be used to deploy your applications. So how do you do that? As soon as you open this up, this is pretty much an equivalent of your FTP source. So I just go to the sites, I go to www.root, and I can see that this is the HTML file that has been put in here. What I have over here for this demonstration purpose is that I have one folder which I have created, which has a simple HTML file. If I just open this up on my local machine, you will see that this is a small static page that I've just created. And I would, if I want to deploy this on Azure App Service and see how it looks online, what I can do is I'll just have to select all the files. I'll just select all the files from this, whichever are required, and just drag and drop over here. It's that simple. And you can see that there's a progress that moves over, and it just comes in and gets completed. Now, if you go back to the tab for your app service and go to overview and just click on your URL for the app service, you will see that the previous default page that was deployed by us, that was deployed by Azure actually, that has now been replaced with the site that we deployed. So it is as easy as this. So you can pretty much deploy your apps directly by dragging and dropping the code directly into this Kudu console, and that allows you to basically complete that. So that is absolutely a very handy tool that you can use. So this is something which can be used as part of a manual deployment. The other automated deployment is something, if you have those CI/CD pipelines defined, you can pretty much use this option on the settings screen. One of the other things that I would also like to touch base upon in this particular section is the identity, or so to say, the authentication part of it. As developers, most of the applications that we develop require some form of authentication and authorization. And usually the authentications that we implement might be our own custom authentications, or they can be any OAuth authentication like Facebook, Google, LinkedIn, Twitter, Apple, Microsoft, and any of these OAuth pipelines can be used to basically add that authentication and authorization layer into our application. One of the ways that app service in Azure allows you to add different sets of authentications is through this screen as well. In this, what you can do is you can add different identity providers which Microsoft has listed. So if I just come into this add identity provider, you will see that Microsoft allows Microsoft authentication, Apple, Facebook, GitHub, Google, Twitter, or any other OpenID connect. So if there is a platform which you want to connect for your authentication purposes, and if it is not listed, you can use the OpenID standard for that. But else, if it's a Microsoft identity that you want to implement, just to choose that, and it just asks you for these different options for Microsoft authentication, which our team would be discussing in the later sessions, where we have a separate topic on authentication and identities. We would be dwelling into more details on that. But this is the connections or different configuration that you do, and just click on add. And that particular provider is added into your application. And then you can pretty much add that code base into your application and start integrating that authentication. How do you do that? If you are not familiar with how to integrate that identity provider, Microsoft Azure also provides you with these small quick starts. Like for this, if you want to integrate Microsoft authentication into your application, this is the entire guide that you have over here, and it pretty much takes you step by step as to how you can integrate this authentication into your application. Similarly, if you want to, let's say, add Facebook as an identity provider, so you have to add the app ID and the app secret that you have to have to deploy on Facebook Developer Console, and add those and click in there. I'll just put in some random values right now just to create those parameters and show you that this get created like this, and you can just have these quick starts for the Facebook integration as well. So Microsoft has all these integrations options available in the documentation that you can use to add these authentication layers into your application. All right. So this actually helps you in implementing these authentications from these trusted providers without having the burden of implementing them yourself. So this entire thing can directly be leveraged from Azure itself. So this is something that I just wanted to show you about as well. If you remember, one of the things that I could not show you while I was deploying the applications due to the free service plan was the networking feature. So if I just come into this networking tab on this, what you can also see in this is that Microsoft automatically creates a sort of a topology or a network architecture diagram for you as to how your application is being accessed or how your application is basically set up in terms of network, like how the inbound traffic is coming, if there are any VNets or stuff that are available in there, which are the IP addresses that your application service has been given. So these sort of details are something which are available on the screen. I just refresh the screen again. Let's just go back to that screen again. Networking. Yeah. So in here you can see that for the inbound traffic, you have these options which you can enable or disable. By default, they are disabled. Like if you want to restrict access to your application, you can do that by adding uh, a rule of restrictions. Like if you want a certain IP address or a IP address block or certain request bearing some sort of HTTP headers, if you want to block, allow, or deny them, you basically can set up these rules. And these rules basically allow access to your application, allow or disallow access to your application. So those can be done. If you have any app assigned addresses that you want, like if you want to assign a domain to your app service, by default, the domains that are assigned to an app service have a Azure website subdomain to it. But if you want your own custom domains, you can do that. You can buy the domains either directly from Azure, or you can have the domains purchased anywhere, and Microsoft Azure will give you those options to claim or validate those ownerships of the domains, and then that automatically gets reflected here. Then if it is an HTTPS domain that you want to implement, and you have the HTTP certificates that you want to assign it to, or the TLS SSL bindings, you can do that directly from Azure as well. You can buy the certificates directly. There is also an option that I'm just going to show you over here in terms of free app service based certificates as well, which are available, which have been recently added by Azure actually. So I'll just show you those as well. So this particular part is something which will allow you to assign addresses, domains, SSL certificates and stuff. Then you also have an option of private endpoints. So private endpoints are basically something which allow your internal applications, virtual network subnets to access your applications. If you want a make this application a private endpoint, then this won't be available to the public, and it won't be accessible directly through the public network. It has to come through a certain virtual network that we create on your Azure instance, and from there, or a certain subnet, and from there only it can be accessed. So if you want these network related security features to be enabled, those are something which can be done over here. And this is the IP address which is assigned to my app service by Azure, which can be seen over here. This is the web app where the domain is currently being shown. You also have different features which is part of our future sessions that we are going to do is on CDN and how you can implement a CDN as well to make your application performance better. Then the outbound traffic also has different options like the VNet integrations if you want to integrate a virtual network. If your organization has different virtual networks that you want, and you want your outbound traffic to go through a certain virtual network and only go through that and not directly into the public network, then you can use that and implement that VNet. Also, there is an option of hybrid connections that Microsoft has brought in, and those hybrid connections are something which enable your app to access different TCP endpoints using hybrid connections. So that is something that is part of the networking infrastructure that can be enabled as well, and your network team or your security team might be able to help you in this if your organization has that. And these are different outbound addresses that are basically shown. So that is something which I just wanted to touch base upon in terms of the networking that we can do. While I was discussing this, I was talking about the custom domains and TLS SSL settings. So if I just go to custom domains, and if you want to add a custom domain into your application, how do you do that? You basically click on the add custom domain, and you can put in any domain name. Like if I just want to put in, let's say, SkyPiCast.com. So I just need to put in the domain that I want to assign it to, click on validate, and it will check whether this host name is available or not. So it says that this host name is available, but I do not have a valid ownership of the domain. How do I prove the ownership of the domain? There are two ways. One is if the domain is something which is deployed on other name server like GoDaddy, HostGator, any other domain provider, you have to access the DNS management of that particular portal and edit either of these two options. One is an A record and one is a CNAME record. So as soon as you click on one of these, you get the values that you need to assign it over there. So as soon as you do that, you will see that these are the options that you need to enable in your DNS provider side to basically claim your ownership or prove your ownership of the domain. Once you have done this and click on the validate button, and as soon as the DNS settings have propagated, you will see that this also goes to a green check, and you will have this button which is called add custom domain. This gets enabled to a blue button, and then you can just click on that, and then domain gets added to your Microsoft Azure App Service. And rather than using that xyz.azurewebsites.net, you can pretty much use your own custom domain to access the website which is hosted on Azure. So that is how you actually claim your custom domains. Once you have a custom domain assigned, if that is an HTTPS and you already have a certificate assigned to it, or if you want to procure a certificate for that, you can do this from here. So there are two options, TLS SSL settings and a preview one. I'll talk about both of them. So this was the older settings wherein you can just add a TLS SSL binding. You have to choose the custom domain. Since I don't have a custom domain right now, I don't get that in the dropdown. If you had, you would get that. And the private subscription thumbprint, you have to choose that. How do you do that? You have to first upload your certificates. So you can upload either a certificate that you have got from your service provider where you have bought the service. You can import a keyword certificate if that is the method that you're using. You can have these two options as well. One is a create app service managed certificate, and this is the one which I mentioned is a sort of a free way. So the way this has been created is that an app service managed certificate is created, which is only local to the app service that you are using right now, which we have created. And these these certificates are actually not available in its expiry for a longer duration. They are 45 days. They are created and generated for a span of 45 days, and then they get expired, and then automatically a new certificate is generated. So it doesn't have a longer expiry date, but it is free and it is automatically regenerated by Microsoft Azure for after as soon as it is about to expire. So this is one of the options that can be also used to use SSL settings on your application. The other one is you can buy a certificate directly from Microsoft using this option. So if you have Microsoft also lets you buy those certificates for whatever price they are available for based on what domain you are taking, whether it's a wildcard certificate that you want or not. So based on that, the prices are calculated, and you can buy the certificate and then import that certificate as soon as that is available and integrate that. One of the details that I just want to share at this juncture is that about this app service managed certificate, which is free. Although it is free, this certificate does not has its own limitations. And what are those limitations? Those limitations would be that it doesn't allow wildcard domains actually. So if you are going to use your domain and your application and have subdomains as well, or which you want to use and you want them to have a SSL certificate bound as well. So this certificate, which is the free one offered by Azure, this won't cut it. So this won't be able to serve your purpose over there. All right. So these are the features that I just wanted to discuss on the first part of our module, which was exploring of the Azure App Services, how we can deploy a small app service, which we did, and we can pretty much see how that application looks in real time. As soon as that is deployed, you can pretty much have a look at that and see how that looks. One of the other elements that I would also see now, one of the things that you might be noticing now is that as soon as I started this, started to open my site, it automatically started asking me for permissions, which was not the case earlier. And why this might have come? This has come because I was showing you about the authentications and I had enabled these providers. And that is why it is getting that particular, it is not allowing me to access the site without going through the authentication process. So if I just want to disable this, I just have to delete these identity providers and just click on these, and I'll remove the authentication from here, and it just comes back to its original form. I'll just go back to the screen again and click on the Azure website's URL again, and you see that now it doesn't ask me for any sort of authentication. It just opens up on its own. So that authentication can directly be enabled from here, and it automatically secures your site without having to make any changes into your code as well. All right. So the second part of my session that I would just like to continue on would be the configuration side of it. So one of the most important part in this entire dashboard that you're currently seeing for our app service is this part, which we haven't had a look at yet, which is the settings. And in settings, you will see that this button called configuration, this is available. And this is a very important part and very important section that we have in our Azure toolkit. This has actually 4 tabs. The first one is the application settings. Then we have the general settings, the default documents, and the path mappings. I'll just go through each of those and tell you what they are. The application settings is something which allows you to add different app settings, which usually are added by ourselves when we develop our applications. We either use app config files or web config files. So these service configuration files that we create, we usually tend to add a section called app config, and we put different elements into those, like different key value pairs we use for different parts of our application, which we want to make dynamic by adding those configuration values and do not want to hard code them directly into our code. So one of the ways that you can do that is directly from here in this portal. You can just add a new application setting, whatever that is. You just have to put in the setting name and whatever the value is. So you just put the setting name and whatever value you want, and you can just click on OK. One of the things that you will see in this is that this checkbox, which is a deployment slot setting. I'll talk about deployment slots later in detail, just a few minutes, just after a few minutes. But deployment slots are something wherein Azure App Service allows you to manage your staging, production, or different environments directly from the app service, where you can have the staging and the production systems running side by side on the same app service, but on different slots. And you can have your staging application done, deployed, tested, and once you are comfortable to move it to production, you just swap the slots. You just make the staging into a production slot, and automatically moves or swaps everything up. So this deployment slot setting configuration, if enabled, when the swap is made, it will also move this particular configuration as well. If you do not choose it, during the swapping, the deployment slots, it will not be moved. So if you want this particular configuration to be swapped during the deployment slot swapping, you can enable this, or you can keep it if you do not want that. I just click on OK. And as soon as you see that, it is available over here. And you can see that there's a small asterisk mark over here, which means that just by adding this in here doesn't save it. You have to click on this save, which will ask you that once you save these changes, there will be a restart of the app service to make these changes permanent. So that is something that has to happen. And you can see that the updating web app settings is shown over here, and it says that it has been successfully updated. One of the other parts on this particular tab is the connection string as well. So we all use our applications for connecting to different databases, and in our application, we have the connection string parameter as well. So that connection string parameter can be managed directly from this part as well. So you can just click on new, add the name of the connection string, whatever the connection string value is, and what is the type of database that you are trying to connect, whether it's MySQL, SQL Server, whatever the options are, or you can have a custom database connection string as well that you can put in here if the options are not available. So this allows you to add connection strings, which can be then accessed directly on your application from the code side as well. The second tab in here is the general settings. It has different settings in terms of what technology stack you are using. Like we use the technology stack for .NET, ASP.NET 4.8. If at a later point in time you want to change it to a Python, PHP, or a Java stack, you can do that. You have to save that. But mind you that if you change it from a absolutely different, from one tech stack to a absolutely opposite tech stack, like from .NET to Java, obviously your current app won't work. You have to redeploy your new app, which is on Java. So you have to basically take care of that. The other part, which is in the platform settings, is whether you want your platform to be a 32-bit platform or a 64-bit platform. This is a feature which is available only because I have chosen .NET, and .NET is deployed on IIS app server. So in app servers in IIS, some application developers still use the old classic IIS version, whereas the pipeline version that are used over there are the classic or the legacy pipelines. So that can be used if you are using an old, or you're trying to deploy an old application. If it is a newer IIS version application, then you can just choose the default which is integrated. Then FTP state, if you want only FTPS connections, which is FTP over SSL, then this can be enabled. All allowed means that you are allowing FTP, FTPS both. And disabled means that you are totally disabling or basically not allowing any sort of FTP connections to your server. The HTTP version can also be configured, whether you want a 1.1 or a 2.0 HTTP version. Whether your application supports WebSockets or not, that can be enabled or disabled. This is one of the features that is very important as well, which is always on, and it is only available on standard tiers and upwards. What this does is that if you make it, if you keep it on, it means that your app service is never idled out, or it is not stopped due to inactivity. So let's say that your application doesn't have a lot of visitors. So if this option is turned off, what will happen is that if there is no traffic and no activity into your application for a certain amount of time, your Azure automatically stops the app service to prevent any sort of billings that can happen due to the idle time. So if that is something that you want, you can keep it to off, and it will automatically stop your app service if there is no request. But the best part is that if there is a new request that comes up, it automatically again starts the service as well. But it might take a few seconds more to start the application. But this is not advisable if you have a web job that you have scheduled to run at a certain amount of time. So web jobs cannot invoke the application if it is in a stopped state. So if the application was idled out and has stopped, the web jobs will also fail to start. So you have to keep that in mind, that if your application is using some scheduled task or activities, then this has to be always on. Then the ARR affinity is something which is where if you are using scaling of applications, wherein your application has been scaled to different instances for balancing of a load, then what happens is that if I as a user come to your site and I have been redirected to a certain instance of the application hosted on a certain server, I get the connection or the session created, but the subsequent requests, all the requests subsequently on different pages that I make, I would want to have the connection made with the same server from which I initiated that, because there is a session that has been created with that. So for that, this ARR affinity is enabled. How does it help? It creates a ARR affinity cookie on your browser, which has an instance ID associated with it. And if there are multiple instances in your Azure App Service which has been scaled up or scaled out, and it basically allows Azure to know that the client who has sent the request needs to be sent to which instance of your application. If that is not the case, it is quite possible that first request goes to instance A and the second request goes to instance B or C. And in there might be a possibility that the server to client sessions might be disrupted and the user experience might be impacted. So that is an important part if that is the case and you are using scaling or auto scaling in your application. HTTPS only can be enabled or disabled, which allows your app to be available only on HTTPS or not. Then the TLS version, which needs to be added, and whether you want to allow or disallow remote debugging, and whether you want all incoming traffic to bear a certain certificate or not for security. These are some options that can be enabled or disabled from here. Default documents is a section wherein if someone comes and just puts in your domain name and doesn't say which file they want to access, like index.html or page1.html or whatever, if you want to just make a certain file as a HTML, like index.html or anything, which as your home page, you basically do that in your default document. So whatever page you want to put as the home page, you just put that name of the document in this and it automatically works. If there are two files which are available in your application and they both feature in this default document, it is always the first in the list which appears that will be prioritized over the one that comes later. So this is the default document section. Path mapping is where you can create handler mappings in your app service is required. You can create virtual applications and directories. Say, for example, if I have an app service which has a certain application deployed, but I also want a sub application inside that. Let's say my application is called SkyPiCast at azure.websites.net. And I also want one sub application called app1. That is an absolutely separate application, but it is deployed in that same app service, but as a virtual application. I can create that. I just have to click on this new virtual application and directory, create the virtual path by specifying a / and then the name of the app, and then what is the physical path. So the physical path of your site is actually site /www root, and then you have to just create that folder in your FTP and deploy your application in that, and it automatically gets handled. If it is a virtual application, you have to deselect this directory option. And if it is a virtual directory, you just have to select this check option. So that is only check that you need to make. If it's a virtual application, this check mark has to be removed. If it's a directory, you just have to select this. So yeah, these are pretty much all the options that I wanted to share with you on in terms of the configuration part of it. The third section that I want to touch base upon is the scaling. So one of the scaling options is the one which I showed you, which is called as a scale up. It is a vertical. So in any sort of cloud environment, there are two types of scaling. One is a vertical scaling and one is a horizontal scaling. So vertical scaling is scaling your app service plan or your pricing tier to a higher resource tier, wherein if you feel that your application is lagging or it is not performing up to the mark, and that is due to a resource constraint, what you can do is just go up one tier up above, which has more resources, and that basically makes the performance much better. But it also brings in higher costs as well. And that is called as a vertical scaling. The other part is scaling out, which is called as a horizontal scaling, which means that you have one instance of your application and it has a certain pricing tier attached to it, certain resources attached to it, and your application is running. You do not need a higher plan uh, always. You just want to handle your traffic and your application performance maybe on an ad hoc basis, or maybe as soon as or whenever there is a sudden rise in traffic. We usually see this in sites wherein if there is certain time of the year when there are sales and stuff happening, a lot more traffic comes to the site, while on off-peak days the traffic just comes down drastically. So to handle that, what can be done on a cloud platform like Azure is that we can horizontally scale our application based on requirement or manually. So the scale up is something which I showed you earlier, wherein we just upgrade our tiers and the pricing plan. The scale out is something which can either be done manually or on a custom way. Manual means that you just have a current instance of one app service and you just manually upgrade it or add multiple instances to it. So if I see that there is a sudden increase in traffic or load in my site and I just want to balance that load, I can just manually increase it to different number of instances that I have. So the current pricing tier that I have chosen, it allows me to increase the instances counts to 10, meaning that I can have parallelly 10 instances of the same app handling my request of the customers. So this is where the parallel computing of a cloud comes in, and your application is just cloned 10 times, and it's passed through a load balancer, and all the requests coming through it is equally distributed among all the different sets of activity, all the sets of instances, and your application load is pretty much managed over there. This is very easy to do, and it can be done as per your requirement based on the minimum and the maximum instance counts that your pricing tier supports. The only problem is that if you forget to bring the instance count down when the load comes down, you are still going to incur the costs on a very high scale. So this is a manual instance scaling, where the only downside is you have to manually bring it up or bring it down. The other part which Microsoft allows is a custom scaling. In custom scaling, you can create different rules, and based on those rules, your application Azure automatically scales it up or down. Like for example, if I just create a new rule, and in here I see that I can create a new rule, and in this rule there are different parameters that can be set. Let's say for example that if I want that the CPU percentage, the average CPU percentage is greater than 70, if it is greater than 70 for a duration of 10 minutes, then increase the count by 1. So this rule that is by default set, what is saying is that if your application's CPU percentage is greater than 70% for a duration of 10 minutes straight, it automatically should increase the instance count by 1. Similarly, let's say that I want to add this rule, and I also want to add another rule that when the traffic or the load comes down, I want to bring the instance count back as well. So if I say that if the CPU percentage is lower than 30% for a duration of 10 minutes, then decrease the count by this number of instances, or decrease the count to 1 instance. It means that decrease the count to means that the end number of instances that are finally going to run is going to be 1. So it is just going to, if there are 10 instances running, it's going to just bring it down to 1. So these are different rules that you can just set up, and this allows you to, the scale rule allows you to set up as many flexible rules as you want to just scale up your application. One thing that you just have to remember is that these scales or rules basically can be added, and if none of the rules match, then there is always one default condition which is going to be this maximum minimum one, which is going to be available. And if none of your rules work, then this default always would work, which means that you always would have at least one instance always running. All right. So after this scaling, the other part that I would just like to uh, finish this session with is in this environments, and which is where the deployment slots come in. So in this deployment slots, and let me tell you that this deployment slot option is only available in app services which have a standard or higher pricing plan. In there, what you can do is you can have different deployment slots created. By default, there is one deployment slot that is created, which is the production slot. What I will now do is I'll just create one additional slot and I'll just name it SkyPiCast staging. Okay. And I won't clone any settings from anywhere. If you want, you can just clone your settings from the production instance as well if you want, or if you do not want to clone any settings, you can just leave that as well. So I'm just not going to clone any settings from there and just click on add. It will take a few minutes and then your new app slot is created. So how does an app slot differ from app service? So app service now becomes your container, and inside that container, you have two separate instances of the same app service, but it has now two slots which are running independently. So the resources are pretty much the same, but they are now being divided into two different slots. One is where you either can be use it as your staging environment, and one as the production. So the production is always marked with this particular flag called production, and this is the your staging or whatever you want to call it. So now deployment slots have a varied number of use cases. So let's say that I want to have this as my staging environment. So I'm just going to click this, and you'll see that this now opens up with my SkyPiCast one, which is my app service, and it says that it is the staging environment. So you'll see that all the options that I had previously, they're all coming in here. But the URL that you are seeing now, it now is not skypicast.azurewebsites.net, but it is skypicast hyphen skypicast staging, which is the name that I gave, .azurewebsites.net. And what if I click on this? So you will see that it has now that default page that Microsoft deployed previously on my app service. But if you remember, I had updated my app service to have this SkyPiCast app service sample HTML site page. So it is still in here, which is skypicast1.azurewebsites.net, because this is a production instance and this is my staging instance. So now what I can do is I'll do the exact same thing that I did with my production environment, wherein I deployed my code. And I'll just show you how that would work and how we can swap different slots in runtime. So let me just open the Kudu services again, go to the PowerShell, and deploy the same app service or the same files that we had in our production into the staging as well. And I'll just make a small change in that. I'll just drop everything in here. And in the staging one, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to update the index.html. And in here, it also gives you this editor as well. Right, root index.html. And in here, I'll just say at the very end, staging, just to show that this is the staging version. Just click on save, go in here, go to my overview, open my SkyPiCast staging, and you see that the staging URL now has the staging word written and the production one doesn't have that, which basically tells me that these are two different sites running at two different instances. Now, let's say that I have done my staging deployment. It is all tested and everything, and I now want to move it to production. So how do I do that? There are two ways. One is the manual way that you copy the entire code from staging and put it into your production environment deployment. The other smart way is just swapping the slots. Okay, so we'll again go to deployment slots, and in here we just have to use this option of swap slots. Before doing that swapping, I would just like to uh, just tell you something about this feature which I wanted to share with you. This is a traffic percentage. So there are instances wherein by default your customers are all coming to your production site. The staging site is something which has a separate URL which you can manually share with your testing team and your testing user base, and they can just test it and they can give you your feedback, and then you can just move into the production slot. One more thing that you can also do is that you can just redirect a fraction of your traffic from your production to your staging. So for that, I'll just come to our app service, and in here, not on the staging slot, but in the actual production slot, if you come, you'll see that I can now put some amount of my traffic. Let's say that I put 50-50. So, and click on save. So now what will happen is that if I just open this up in my page, 50% of my users will see the production site, but 50% of my users see that one of the requests I got the staging URL or the staging page. But if I refresh this again, I might just keep on getting staging, but there might be an instance where if I just open this up again somewhere, it will just open up my production instance as well. So it is currently taking up my IP address, so it is just pushing the staging right now. But the traffic can be diverted to based on your percentage of target traffic for testing. You can just divert a fraction of your traffic or a percentage of your traffic to the production and some of to the staging as well, and then get the analytics for that particular run on the staging side and see how it fared. And then if everything looks okay with the real life customers, you can just swap it. So right now I'll just again bring it back to 0 and 100 to the production, and then I'll show you how the swapping would work. That would be the last step in this deployment slot. So the swapping, how it works is you just click on swap, and right now if I just go back again, and I'll just show you that the production. So here you can see that the swap now shows two options. One is the source, which is the SkyPiCast staging, and the production is the SkyPiCast 1, which is there. Now the source changes that are available in here. You can see all the configuration changes that we talked about in the application settings. For the production slot, they are shown over here, and the one which is available on your target, which is the SkyPiCast 1, that is also shown over here. So it just tells you what the old value is and what the new value would be when you move your staging environment and swap it with your production environment. So this is what it shows you in terms of configuration. If you are okay with it, you can just click on this swap, and once this swap happens, your entire staging instance would now become your production instance, and your production instance that was previously there, it will now become your staging instance. So it will just take a few minutes of time, and the swapping happens. You can just keep this running while it is happening. Oh no, you cannot move away from the screen. So we just have to wait for a few seconds. While it's happening, we can just see if there are any changes that are here. So now you see that the staging environment URL that I had, which had that staging at the end bracket, it has now gone, which means that the production site code has now migrated to the staging instance. And if I go in here, it was already showing staging because I had that routing of traffic. So it is already showing this. Now you see that this has happened. And if I just close this, you can see that the versions that we wanted to swap, they have been swapped. The name doesn't change, but the actual code bases that are deployed, they are automatically swapped between the two instances. So yeah, this is pretty much it from the standpoint of this module that I wanted to share with you people today. And if there are any questions or any feedback that you might have, I'll just open the house for it. And thank you for joining the session.